It's no secret that there have been a lot of layoffs in tech over the past several months. It's all that I could really read about. And I see a ton of commentary about the tech layoffs with a lot of criticism on the leadership of the organization for laying people off. And when I read through these conversations that are taking place on Twitter and LinkedIn, I feel like folks are missing really why these layoffs are happening in the first place. So I thought I'd make this video to help anybody who's curious understand why companies lay off salespeople and marketing people and what you can do in order to prevent this from happening within your own organization. So before I actually share with you some of my thoughts around this, I want to first preface this entire video with, I am not saying layoffs are good or bad. I'm frankly not really even sharing my opinion on specific layoffs. What I'm hoping to do in this video is educate around why layoffs are taking place in the sales and marketing departments, because it seems to be confusing a lot of people, and it doesn't really have all that much to do with just generally wanting to reduce spend. I mean, sure, that's part of it, but really there are other factors within the organization that have changed, which is making it a lot more challenging to keep salespeople at the headcount number that they currently have them at. Before I give you an example, I want you to understand a couple of terms so that way we're all on the same page. The first is customer acquisition costs, or CAC. This is how much you pay to acquire a customer. The next is lifetime value, or LTV. This is over the lifetime of that customer being a customer, how much they pay the organization. That is very tied to retention, which is how long a customer actually stays with an organization. And in this video, I talk about net retention a lot. So what percent of your customers are actually staying with the organization year over year. Then there's payback period. This is how long a customer has to stay to pay back what it costs to acquire and service that customer. And then finally, we have runway. This is simply how much cash do you have where you can keep running the company as is before running out of money. Now that we've agreed on all those terms, let me share with you how all of this comes into play when you're considering layoffs. Let's say you're the CEO of ABC Company. ABC Company is the leader in the space for project management. So this is a tool that companies use to manage projects and tasks across multiple different departments. You've been living a good life for a very long time, seeing 120% retention. So that means every single year, your current book of business is expanding by 20%. And that's because your customers are growing as well. They're hiring more people. Those people need licenses. So they end up paying you, the project management software company, for more licenses, which means every customer ends up growing by 120% year over year. So you're getting that growth. This is incredibly exciting because you can now pay even more to acquire a customer, because you know, as a general rule, your customer base grows 20% year over year. You have some people leave and then you have a lot more people gain. So in that case, you almost don't care what you're willing to spend for a customer, because you know that customer base is going to keep growing and growing and growing. So as long as it's not crazy, you're going to be in good shape. And since you care a lot less about your customer acquisition costs, what do? You spend a lot more money on sales and marketing. So maybe you hire more salespeople. Maybe you spend a lot more on marketing. Maybe you spend money on marketing that you can't really track the effectiveness of, right? So you're doing all of this spending. All you know is that customers that are coming in, because your retention is so good, you're actually growing at a really, really fast rate. Everything is going fantastic. So you're living this good life. You have all these salespeople, and then things start to shake a little bit. The economy starts doing worse. People start laying people off. Well, when they lay people off, what do? They reduce the amount of licenses they have at your company. So now you're seeing that retention that was 120% drop down to 90%. So that means every year, instead of your current customers growing by 20%, they're actually shrinking by 10%. So now you're actually losing customers every year when you used to be gaining just by doing nothing. So what does this mean? Well, this means that customers' lifetime value all of a sudden has not only decreased, it decreased by quite a bit. So since it decreased by so much, right, going from 120% all the way down to 90%, it's a 30%, 30% reduction. What are you going to do? Because now all of a sudden the customers that you're bringing on, you're actually bringing on those customers at a loss, because you were spending so much to acquire them because you knew they were just going to grow by 20% on average year over year. So your lifetime value was so strong that you would pay whatever to acquire the customer. Well, now you can't. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to reduce your customer acquisition costs. And now what are some ways that you could do that? Well, one way is by training the sales team. Maybe if we increase the conversion of the salespeople, we'd be able to acquire more customers quicker and just a higher quantity of customers. And that'll help make up for our decrease in retention, and it'll work out. Sales training you have to pay for. That's fine. But also it might take a little while. It might take 3 months for the training really to take effect, right? Because people need to execute it on it regularly. Your managers have to do a good job training the reps. All of this stuff is challenging. So it's not guaranteed, but it could be a good thing to do. Well, what else could we do to lower our customer acquisition costs? We could spend less on marketing. So maybe we don't do a Super Bowl ad this year. Maybe we reduce how much we're spending with Facebook advertising. So now there's less leads, but we've lowered our customer acquisition costs because we're not spending in these other marketing areas we can't track very well. But we also don't know the impacts of not spending in that area because we're not tracking it very well. We could start cutting our billboard ad spend and also see a big reduction in leads. Maybe they're helping more than we think they are because we're just not tracking it very well. So there's a little bit of risk there too. Another thing you can do is you can lay off salespeople. Maybe you have 20% top performers who are exceeding their quota. Maybe you have 60% that are barely hitting their number or hovering around their number. What about the remaining 20%? These are people who've never hit their number before. Well, what if we fire them and get rid of half of the people who are barely hitting their number and just keep the real top performers and some of the people who are at the top of the pack in that 60%? Well, now we cut headcount dramatically. Our customer acquisition cost goes down. We could probably stay spending money with Facebook advertising and just keep our top performing salespeople. Now, overall, we have reduced our customer acquisition costs because we're getting more volume on average out of the salespeople that we have today. And that's ultimately what organizations are doing. Some organizations are seeing huge impacts in their churn numbers or their retention. And that means that it no longer financially makes sense to keep the sales and marketing spend at where it is because you would actually be acquiring customers at a loss because you know they're not going to stay for long enough to be able to pay back the money you spent to acquire them, right? That's that payback period we were talking about earlier. So I know there's a lot of numbers. I know there's, a lot of different things at play, and I'm by no means oversimplifying this issue and saying this is the only reason why layoffs are happening. I'm just hoping to share with you some of the logic behind why you would make cuts to your workforce when you see things happening in the market. It's not a reflex just out of fear to cut people because you're afraid you're going to be losing business. It's not just, hey, we should cut costs because we need to cut costs. It's because they're actually looking at data from their business and they're starting to see, oh, our customer acquisition costs are too high and we're no longer acquiring customers profitably. I mean, imagine that. Imagine you run a company and all of a sudden over a 3-month period of time, you realize that every customer that you bring in is actually costing you money. And there's a lot of organizations that fall into that category and they have no choice. They have to make cuts because every customer that they sign is actually going to cost them money to have as a customer because they're going to churn. So hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions about it, make sure you post it in the comments below. Of course, it's a multifaceted, complex issue. Just wanted to share some insight on how customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, and retention all come into play and cause a company to rethink the amount of people that they have in their sales and marketing organization.